She took his hand. The room clapped. I didn't interrupt. I set a timer. When it hits 0, only proof will be left. Gold light dripped from the chandeliers like warm honey as the quartet stitched a cheerful, forgettable melody through a room trained to applaud itself. Waiters floated, names sparkled, and Myra belonged to all of it, angles perfect, hair pinned. To look effortless, dress calibrated for sponsors' memories. He arrived with the quiet entitlement of a man who never hears no. Silver hair, midnight tux, a cologne that smelled like access. He didn't ask me, didn't even clock me, just touched Myra's elbow and said, "Come on, the floor is waiting," and the band obediently sweetened the song. She looked at me once, not a question, just a check, then slipped her ring into her clutch with a soft click and set her hand in his, drawing the room's teasing oohs and small whistles. "For the donors," someone behind me said, as if kindness could be itemized. I raised a glass I didn't drink and watched them be good together in that photogenic, careful way strangers can be. She laughed at his first misstep, the soft laugh that used to belong to our late walks, and when her eyes brushed me again, they moved on, not cruel, just confident in a system that had rewarded both of them for years. I could have crossed the parquet, could have placed a hand on a shoulder and made the band stutter, could have parsed the difference between public relations and public disrespect in a voice sharp, enough to cut and quiet enough to be called polite. But I counted instead 8 bars to a turn, 4 measures to a dip. 2 people who believed music could hide intent. The same math I'd been avoiding for months as late meetings evaporated. Receipts looked homeless and new vocabulary traded. Love for optics. The song crested. He whispered something. She tipped her head back and flashed a perfect smile. A camera popped, another. 2 donors near me praised their chemistry, and I smiled the way men smile when only their teeth are required. When the applause settled like sand into a glass, he bowed and she curtsied as if rehearsed. The MC urged everyone to keep the evening alive, and I set my glass on a cocktail table beside the auction booklet, aligning its base to the edge. Until it sat exact, because control doesn't need volume, it needs aim. I didn't cut in. I cut loose, not from her, not yet, but from the version of myself that confuses endurance with love. The quartet changed keys, the lights warmed. Myra and her sponsor drifted to a cluster of compliments, and I adjusted my cuff, took 1 step back from the music, and chose the quietest verb I know. I began. What should hurt more here, the dance or the disrespect? Tell me in the comments. The city slid across the windshield in long, glassy streaks as if the night were being erased while we watched, wipers ticking once to clear the gala from our view. And Myra filled the car with the bright, brittle tone she uses when outcomes need justification. Harmless, she said. He sponsors spring. It's optics, the same word that has been doing overtime lately. I said nothing because silence is not surrender, it's surveillance, and I have learned that feelings argue while facts arrange themselves. She teased me, "You're quiet," and I answered, "I'm listening," which was true in every way that mattered. Because the dashboard lit a soft notification on her phone that she tried to dismiss with casual fingers, an email preview. That shouldn't have existed yet. Reimbursement attached. Request pre-approved, wrong fund code, and the date 2 days ahead like someone signing tomorrow with yesterday's pen. I've spent years reading upside-down spreadsheets in meetings, and didn't need more than a heartbeat to memorize what mattered. The car smelled faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine and a hotel soap we don't buy. Details don't accuse, they accumulate, and I let them. Recalling the last quarter's small frictions, the work trips that generated no photos, the vendor names that appeared once and disappeared forever, the way she'd started calling necessary things strategy and unnecessary things noise. At a red light, a group outside laughed with the shameless joy of people who owe nothing to anyone, and I envied them for exactly 1 breath. The light went green, I let a rideshare cut in, and Myra's voice softened into the version of herself that sells fragile ideas to sturdy donors. "You know how these nights go." She said, "And I do," I said, though what I meant was I know how patterns go, and patterns are choreography printed on life. She asked if I was angry, and I tasted the old habit rising, the urge to explain myself into exhaustion, so I swallowed it and gave her the truth she couldn't spend. "No," I said, I'm clear, which landed between us with the gentle thud of a suitcase on a hotel bed. In the garage, our headlights swept across the same bicycles we never ride, the box of winter things we forget until the first frost. And I saw our marriage the way I see storage. Not broken, just mislabeled. We parked, the engine ticked down. And she touched my sleeve as if to reset the evening to factory settings. I stepped out first, not unkindly, just precisely, taking the elevator's mirrored silence to rehearse the rule I would live by from here on: no scenes, only proof. The apartment greeted us with the soft hush of expensive quiet, the kind you buy with double-glazed windows and a doorman's nod, yet even silence has texture when you're paying attention. And tonight it felt like felted wool, neat, compressed, hiding seams. Myra headed straight for the mirror we pretend is art and began unpinning the evening from her hair, humming something she'd heard under the chandeliers, while I hung my jacket with the care you give objects you plan to leave behind someday, and turned toward the small desk by the window where our bills pretend to be organized, because if anger is a match, order is a firebreak. I powered the laptop, slid my phone onto airplane mode, and pulled the neat stack of temporary envelopes from the drawer that had been swallowing them for months. Vendor slips, courier notes, a thank you card from a person we never met, and I did what systems do best. I named things. A new folder on the desktop, simple, unsarcastic optics. Inside it, a grid waiting for truth to arrive in straight lines. I began with what doesn't argue: timestamps, receipts, event programs with names circled faintly in pencil, a screenshot of the gala schedule with the dance starting at 9:14, a calendar capture of Myra's private block-off by 17 minutes from the invoice submitted later as community outreach. And already the rose hummed like a chord you can feel under your ribs when the notes align. I didn't narrate. My work didn't clear my throat, didn't invite debate. I scanned, labeled, aligned, letting facts do what facts do when they're not rushed, make patterns undeniable. In the bathroom, water started and stopped, a drawer clicked, her phone buzzed twice and went still, and across my screen an email I was never meant to read bloomed in the corner: reimbursement form attached, pre-approved by Raphael, effective 2 days from now, tomorrow's signature on yesterday's expense, a trick as old as confidence. I printed to PDF, saved duplicates, exported the metadata the way you'd photograph footprints before the rain, then took a breath long enough to return my face to neutral, because truth has a shape and it is patient. I added small things that don't look like evidence until they're next to other small things, a line from the caterer confirming sweet refresh by 2, a rideshare receipt dropping at the hotel entrance 15 minutes before Myra told me she was still with the media team, a donor's public post timestamped with her in the background where she shouldn't have been, and as the file grew, the house seemed to shrink around it, the way a room feels when you move a couch and suddenly see the dust that proves the furniture has been lying for years. She walked out in a robe, skin-dewed from heat, and asked too brightly if I wanted tea. I'm fine, I said, which was true in the new definition I'd chosen. And when she drifted past the desk, she didn't look down, because people who thrive on optics don't look directly at measurements. When she went to bed, I added the last piece for the night, a photograph of the clutch on the dresser with the ring she dropped into it before the dance, not because a ring proves love or the lack of it, but because objects remember where hands have been. I closed the lid, placed my passport and the deed copy for my father's watch into a small envelope that slides under a belt without announcing itself, and wrote 3 lines on a sticky note for a man I trust to keep documents, not secrets. Hold. Do not act. Call only if asked. The note wasn't for Myra. Warnings are invitations to argue. It was for the next version of me, the one who doesn't raise his voice, who doesn't perform pain for witnesses, who understands that endings aren't shouted, they're filed. If you're still here and haven't subscribed, that's on you. It's free. Hit subscribe to Fractured Promises. Morning arrived like a verdict gray light on the countertop, the kettle's measured breath, the apartment wearing last night's decisions without complaint, and I stood in the small kingdom of routine, arranging cutlery as if straight lines could keep the day honest, while Myra scrolled her phone at the island. with the breezy optimism of someone drafting a caption to rename history. "Carousel from the gala?" she asked, thumbs dancing. "Tag the foundation. Highlight the sponsors." And I said, "Post whatever you like," which sounded permissive but meant something else entirely. Because today my words would be scales, not paint. She peered up, hunting for my usual softness, then tried the angle that always bought time humor dipped in innocence. "You know, donors one dance and they think they own the parquet." And I nodded the way you nod at a waiter describing a dish you won't order. "You're quiet," she said, and I answered, "I'm clear." A sentence that made her blink as if someone had turned down the house lights mid-performance. Clarity, it turns out, has manners. It waits for you to finish your coffee before it sits across from you and slides its terms across the table. Mine had 4 lines. I wouldn't litigate feelings without facts. I wouldn't provide cover stories. I wouldn't forecast my movements. And I wouldn't raise my voice, not once. She tried the next tool concern rephrased as irritation. "Are we doing this over a dance?" And I set the mug down, not hard, just final. "We're not doing anything," I said. "We're defining it." And the kettle clicked exactly then like a gavel for small domestic courts. I laid out the least dramatic path through the day, counseling together by week's end. And tonight, before the fundraising recap went live, an email from her to the foundation's board clarifying how sweets, reimbursements, and optics had been coded. No blame, just correction, with dates that matched the world rather than the caption. She stared at me as if I'd switched languages. "You can't tell me how to run PR," she said, and I agreed. "I can't," I said. "I can only refuse to run cover," and that distinction placed a clean, quiet distance between us that I didn't have to defend. She reached for the old levers. "You're overreacting. He's harmless." "You're embarrassing me," but I let each line walk past me and out the door like shoes that no longer fit. Boundaries don't argue with adjectives. I slid my wedding ring once around my finger, not to threaten its removal, but to remind myself that metal holds its shape by surviving heat. And then I zipped a flat envelope into my jacket, passport, deed copy, the small instructions I'd left for the man at the bank end. Myra saw the envelope and mistook it for theater. "Are you seriously packing?" "I'm seriously precise," I said, and precision, unlike anger, doesn't need an audience. The elevator ride down was a mirror that told the truth, 2 people arranged by habit rather than gravity, and in the lobby the doorman said, "Good morning," in the professional tone of a man who keeps confidences he never asks to hear. Outside, the air had the clean, metallic taste of a day that will not be lied to. My phone buzzed once with a meeting I hadn't requested. Ethics. Conference room 4, 2 o'clock, and I almost smiled. Because when you stop staging scenes, you discover that rooms appear where arguments used to be. I texted Myra a copy of our counseling options, then silenced the thread, not to punish her, but to prevent the noise that makes people believe nothing can be proven unless it is shouted. Boundaries set. I walked toward Worklighter by exactly the weight of the words. I didn't say Conference Room 4 had the kind of careful neutrality that makes truth sound procedural frosted glass. A long table without scratches, a pitcher of water that nobody ever empties, and the ethics officer. A woman with steady eyes and a lawyer's diction. Thanked me for coming as if I'd done something generous. I told her I was here to confirm what happened when and where, not to speculate on why. And she slid a legal pad toward me with 3 neat columns. Date. Document, witness like an invitation to speak in spreadsheets. I laid the artifacts out in order rather than drama. The gala program with the donor's name highlighted. The security timestamp where the band shifted keys at 9:14. The invoice coded to community outreach that matched the suite extension. The pre-approved reimbursement Raphael had signed 2 days in advance. My rideshare receipt dropping at the hotel portico when Myra's calendar claimed she was still in the media room. Each item sat on the table like a chess piece moved without announcement, and the room got smaller in the way rooms do when evidence grows up and takes its own chair. She asked narrow questions. The kind that don't invite stories. Who sent this? When did you receive that? Did anyone instruct you to alter language? And I answered in the same vocabulary, not accused, not implied, simply aligned. She paused longest over the metadata exports. Those quiet fingerprint systems leave behind when people get lazy about time, and she whistled under her breath the way professionals do when surprise meets inevitability. Do you know why you were added as a witness to several donor events? She asked at last, and I said I had guesses but no verified explanation. Good, she said. Keep it that way, and made a notation that sounded like the word board. We circled the one place where my restraint mattered most. Mara and I kept her inside the boundaries I'd set at home. I would not label her motives, but I would authenticate her movements. On the screen, the ethics officer traced the overlap between Myra's calendar and the suite charges with a capped pen. And the pen tapped twice when the pattern closed, as if the table itself had reached a conclusion. She explained next steps with a calm that didn't pretend to be kind document preservation, notification to finance, a limited session review with outside counsel, and then asked whether I wished to submit a statement. I'll provide a timeline and artifacts, I said, not opinions, and she nodded like that was rarer than it should be. Outside the glass, our office carried on with its gentle choreography, someone laughing at a Slack message, a printer warming up, shoes moving past the door, and for a moment I felt the odd relief of handing weight to a scale that can actually hold it. As I packed the folder, the officer stopped me with one last question that wasn't on her pad. Do you feel safe? The honesty surprised me. I told her I felt responsible, which is different, and she wrote a number on a card for after-hours contact, sliding it across the table like a key to a door you hope never to open. When I stepped into the hallway, the building's air tasted newly filtered, and my phone lit with a message from an unknown number. Short session tomorrow. Bring what is yours? No signature, just instructions, and I realized the day had tipped from private calculus to public arithmetic. Whatever came next wouldn't depend on my volume, only my order. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. The restaurant wore its confidence in brass and velvet low lamps, dark wood. A bar that believed in itself, and the birthday table had been stretched into a cheerful runway where laughter could make its entrances. Myra arrived ahead of me with the quick, glittering energy of a host who knows the photographer. And when I stepped in, she touched my arm for exactly 1 second too long, the way politicians do when they need a photo to look like a feeling. Greetings pinned themselves to jackets, menus opened and closed. The special was performed like a monologue. I took the end chair, ordered still water, and let the room decide what it thought it saw. A woman across from us, all bracelets and bright opinions, said we looked uncheckable and asked for our secret, and the table quieted with that hungry curiosity people reserve for recipes and marriages. Mira answered first, reflexively, communication, she said, and trust. The words clicked together so cleanly they squeaked, and the bracelets woman nodded as if she'd been taught something. I lifted my glass and offered a toast that wasn't sharp enough to draw blood, but clean enough to make a line. To communication that survives evidence, I said. And the table laughed, the safe laugh people use when they're not sure if a line was a joke and decide to treat it like one anyway. Myra's smile hitched by a millimeter, then recovered. She reached for my hand beneath the tablecloth and found only wood because my hands were folded politely on the linen, a posture that says present without promising agreeing. The birthday friend told a story about a travel disaster that slid by natural gravity into work travel, and someone asked Myra about that spring suite everybody loved, and the air changed temperature the way it does when a cloud moves. Comped for donors, she said too quickly, and the friend who monitors budgets for a living blinked as if a number had walked past wearing the wrong name tag. I didn't contradict her. I salted my food and let the details misbehave in public. Because truth is a cat, you don't chase it under the sofa, you open a door and it returns when it's ready? Later, the live music edged up from pleasant to participatory, and the singer with the bright mic coaxed couples to the small floor. A man I'd never met loose tie, easy charm gestured between us with the well-meaning tactlessness of strangers and said, "You two never fight, do you?" Myra laughed a half-beat late, that brittle bell a host rings when the bar is closing. "We disagree beautifully," she said, and the singer, hearing the cadence of a line, echoed beautifully into the mic like an ad-libbed refrain. I raised the glass again, not high, not showy, and said, "To beauty that survives an audit." Softer this time, almost kind, and our budget friend looked down at her napkin as if someone had drawn a line on it. Myra squeezed my knee under the table, a coded warning masquerading as affection, and I let the message pass through me without finding purchase. When the check arrived, sleek leather, decisive weight, the loosened tie reached for it with the performative generosity nights like these demand, and Myra, quick to be seen, placed her card neatly on top. The server returned a minute later with an apology rehearsed for 100 past embarrassments. "I'm sorry, it seems there's an issue," and a silence bloomed. Polite at first, then perfumed with curiosity. Myra's throat worked once. Then she smiled at the table with the courage of a person who has survived worse rooms. "Try it again," she said sweetly, and the second attempt failed more quietly than the first. I did not rescue her. I tipped the server in cash for the inconvenience, covered the bill with a card that functioned without drama, and said nothing that anyone could quote later. On the street, the night bent toward rain, and we walked like people who know how to match pace without sharing a destination. "You made me look small," she said finally. Not with rage, but with the thin grief of a performer whose cue was missed, and I answered, "I allowed the room to keep its original size, which is either cruelty or accuracy, depending on which chair you occupied." Back home, the elevator reflected us without commentary, and in the mirrored ceiling I watched an old truth evaporate quietly. Public grace is not the same as private honesty. It just buys time. And tonight the store was closing. The apartment held the kind of quiet that makes every object sound guilty, the soft tap of a key on the tray, the whisper of fabric as a coat finds its hanger, and Myra stood by the window with the city braided through the glass behind her. Hands braced on the sill as if the skyline might sign an affidavit in her favor. "You could have handled that," she said without turning, voice steady the way a tightrope is steady until wind arrives. And I let the sentence finish dying before I answered because timing is a kind of truth. "I handled my part," I said. "I didn't handle your optics." And the word made her flinch like I'd said a private nickname in public. She spun with a smile that wanted to be a strategy, chin lifted just enough to change the angle of forgiveness, and stepped closer until the room smelled like rain and courage. "Then let's handle it together," she said, pulling a chair with her foot and sitting like a negotiator who knows which side of the table she prefers. We fix the card, we post the gala carousel, we move past the theatrics. I sat across from her and placed a thin folder between us, not a threat, a map. "I don't need a carousel," I said. "I need an email tonight to the board, correcting the reimbursement story." No adjectives, just timelines. After that counseling, standing appointment, not aspirational. She exhaled through her nose, a practiced tell, and leaned back with her arms crossed to keep her pulse from traveling to her hands. "You're escalating," she said. "You're trying to shame me into compliance." And I turned the folder so it faced her, because shame speaks in shadows, but this was all fluorescent. "I'm offering sequence," I said. "This, then that. You choose whether the truth leaves your mouth or simply your calendar." We sat with the sentence like you sit with a verdict before the clerk reads it aloud. She flicked the folder open with one finger, eyes moving the way a runner measures distance program, timestamps, sweet code, pre-approval dates that forgot to be humble, and when she reached the metadata page, something in her posture acknowledged something in herself that had known this meeting since the day it became inevitable. "Raphael promised," she started, then stopped. The way you stop in a hallway you suddenly realize is mirrored on both ends. "Raphael promised what?" I asked, and the question wasn't a trap. It was an oxygen test. She closed the folder and pressed her palms flat atop it as if warming a stubborn engine. "That the comp suite was standard," she said. "That pre-approvals keep donors happy, that nobody audits language when outcomes are good." I nodded like a doctor nods at a fever he can measure. "Then the email will be easy," I said. "We'll replace language with numbers." She stood, paced 2 lengths of the rug, and came back with the apology she keeps for emergencies. "I didn't mean to humiliate you," and the version of me from another year would have sprinted to forgive her. A reflex trained by weather, but forgiveness is honest only after repair. This isn't about humiliation, I said. It's about governance here, boundaries there, and the way Harmless likes to use other people's names. The room waited with us. The refrigerator hummed like a witness clearing its throat. At last she picked up her phone, unlocked it, then set it down again, the muscle in her jaw throwing a small, losing tantrum. "If I send that email," she said, "I lose standing," and I shook my head gently. "If you don't, you lose ground?" She stared at the screen a moment longer, then typed a subject line with the slow care of someone engraving metal, "Clarification of expenses, spring events," and looked up at me as if asking whether Daylight would still agree to show up tomorrow. "Send it to your board list," I said. "CC Raphael?" "BCC nobody," and for the first time that night the quiet felt clean. She hit send and the phone made a small, domesticated sound like a bird you let go from your hands. "Counseling?" I asked. She nodded once, cleanly too. The agreement didn't fix anything. It simply named where repair might begin, which is what honest asks are supposed to do when theater closes and the ushers turn on the lights. Morning arrived with the neat efficiency of calendars. Then what clocks can't turning choices into consequences? And before the toast cooled, the first reply to Myra's email landed with the soft brutality of professional tone. "Received? Thank you for the clarification. We'll review with finance and council by end of day," which is the corporate way of saying the ground is considering a new shape. She stared at the screen like it was a shoreline, deciding whether to take another step, then set the phone face down and began cleaning the counter with the zeal of someone, hoping friction can polish a fact into a kinder version of itself. My phone buzzed seconds later from a different corridor of the same House-limited session review. 4 p.m., bring any materials you consider yours, no adjectives, only time and place. I replied with one word, confirmed, because brevity is the suit evidence wears to work. Raphael called Myra while I laced my shoes. His voice carried through the apartment like perfume sprayed in a closed room, pleasant, heavy, impossible to ignore. We could have handled this internally. He insisted clarifications invite confusion. Donor spook easily, and Myra answered in professional syllables. The kind that stack into sentences without ever touching the heart. Transparency prevents rumors. We'll align after the review, and I heard in her cadence the survivor inside the strategist, the one who understands that reputations don't break, they delaminate. On the sidewalk, the city exhaled its weekday breath coffee steam. Bus breaks, shoes with deadlines, and I felt lighter in the way you feel after a long run you haven't taken yet. At my desk, I printed a clean packet, tabbed by function rather than drama. Calendar artifacts, invoices with metadata, security timestamps, my own receipts, and a short cover page titled Sequence, because stories ask to be believed, but sequences insist on being accepted. Around noon, a message from the ethics officer, outside counsel present. Session will be recorded. Good. Recordings give silence a witness. Lena stopped by with 2 coffees and the particular smile friends wear when they're trying not to say "told you." She didn't pry, just slid a highlighter across the packet and said, "Mark what you'd keep if a fire started," which turned out to be less than I thought, 3 pages that did the work of 30 when standing side by side. At 2, Raphael sent a company-wide email about strengthening our stewardship culture, full of words like commitment and gratitude that read like someone ironing a shirt that's already been cut. Minutes later, a private text to me, "We're aligned, yes? No need for theatrics this afternoon." I looked at the word theatrics, has been so busy lately, and put the phone face down the way Myra had done with hers, a small echo that didn't ask permission. At 3:30, I walked the packet to conference room 3 pre-room to 4 sat with the HVACs in different whisper, and rehearsed the only lines I intended to say, dates, times, senders, amounts. The security guard from downstairs came in to test the camera and asked if I needed water in the kindly voice of people who've spent careers watching doors open and close without choosing a side. I said I was fine. Myra texted at 3:47, running 5 minutes late, and the ethics officer's reply appeared in the group thread before. We'll begin at 4 either way. A tremor is not the earthquake. It's the courtesy call, the small mercy time offers before it becomes evidence. At 3:59, I stood, smoothed the cover page, and felt a quiet inside me I hadn't trusted in years. The kind that doesn't ask to be brave because it has already decided to be specific. The door to 4 clicked, not ominous, just exact, and I stepped in with nothing to prove and everything arranged. Conference room 4 was colder than memory. Glass that reflected everyone as a softer version of themselves. A table long enough to keep Eliza honest. Microphones asleep in their cradles like small, expensive birds. And when the ethics officer called us to order, the room narrowed to the size of her voice. Outside counsel sat at her left with a pen that didn't blink. Raphael at the far end with a smile that had learned diplomacy under a heat lamp. And Myra 2 chairs from me, posture impeccable. Phone face down as if good behavior could be staged. The officer stated the scope, limited session, fact-finding. Recorded, then planted 3 anchors that let no one drift. Dates, approvals, fund codes. I slid my packet forward, tabbed to sequence, and spoke in the vocabulary we had all silently agreed to respect. Sender, timestamp, amount, no adjectives, only addresses, and the microphones woke one by one with the tiny click that says we're listening now. Counsel asked me to walk the overlap. Gala schedule. Security time code at 9:14 when the band modulated. Suite extension posted as community outreach, pre-approval created 2 days early. Reimbursement submitted with language that dressed as philanthropy and paid for privacy. I placed each page flat as a surgeon lays instruments. And the room's air changed density the way pools do when deep water begins. Raphael leaned into a pre-written paragraph about donor cultivation. Words like customary and discretion lined up like soldiers who never saw combat, and counsel asked him to locate customary in the policy manual. He turned 1 page to and found prohibited instead. Myra's voice entered, then low, precise. Trained for microphones to clarify that she had relied on leadership guidance, that the line between hospitality and misuse had blurred under pressure to retain a key sponsor. She never looked at me for rescue, and I did not offer any because rescue has to be earned by accuracy first. When asked about the email pre-approvals with future dates, Raphael spoke the word template as if it might take the fall. Counsel asked who wrote the template and who benefited when time lost its meaning, and the pen stopped not blinking for a full 3 seconds, which is what passes for silence in law. The officer turned to me. Were you ever instructed to represent attendance you did not provide? And I answered what I could prove my calendar artifacts. The donor post where my reflection appears in a window I never stood near. The rideshare that placed me at the hotel while Myra's internal entry kept me in a media room upstairs. So your name was used as cover, counsel said without asking, and I replied, my name appeared? I have not found where I agreed. They nodded at the difference as if you can write policy around it, which of course you can. The recording captured everything, including the parts no one will quote later. The chair's soft protest when Myra finally leaned back. The sigh Raphael couldn't quite disguise when the reimbursement line item refused to become innocent. The way the officer's hand hovered over the stop button and then didn't press it, because someone needed to say one last plain thing. That last thing was mine. I said I was not there to accuse a marriage or destroy a livelihood, only to protect my name and the mission we claim to serve. I won't speculate beyond what documents confirm, I said. And I won't be your alibi when they don't. The officer thanked me with a nod that carried weight. Counsel asked for custody of copies, and Raphael requested the courtesy of context, which is what men ask for when facts have already boarded the bus. We adjourned with the soft scrape of chairs, an ordinary sound made solemn by sequence. And as we filed out into the hall, the building felt newly calibrated. Colder, but fairer, like a room where the thermostat finally matches the weather. Myra paused, fingers on her phone as if a text could edit history, and whispered without looking up, "What happens now?" The honest answer was already written on the packet cover. I pointed to it, sequence, the rest would take its turn. The verdict didn't arrive like a gavel. It arrived like a calendar invite subject line plain. Time unavoidable follow-up determinations. 9 a.m. and beneath it 3 attachments that turned breath into arithmetic. A memorandum on improper pre-approvals, a draft statement on interim leadership transitions, and a request for asset control audits that read less like suspicion and more like housekeeping done at last. By the time the building's lights fully woke, Raphael's name had slid to the second paragraph of an internal email that thanked him for years of service, in the oblique past tense organizations use when they've run out of synonyms for enough. And an HR line at the bottom announced a familiar euphemism stepping back for health. The kind of wellness that only starts when power leaves? Myra forwarded me the memo without commentary, then texted, "I'll brief the team. We can talk tonight." And I thumbed back a word that doesn't perform but does conclude. Boundaries, because decisions are best protected by fences built before dusk. At my desk, Lena set a coffee down and raised her eyebrows at the subject line like a friend signal flagging from a neighboring ship. I told her I wasn't celebrating, just concluding, and she said conclusions are the rarest party most people never throw. Mid-morning, the ethics officer returned my packet with copies stamped and cataloged, a chain of custody receipt clipped to the top like a small, honest crown. "There will be policy changes," she said, "and some graceless days, and I appreciated the order of those nouns." The external statement hit the Foundation's feed at noon concise. Careful, threaded with words like clarification, controls, alignment, and my phone pulsed with people performing concern while auditioning for proximity. I let the screen do its light show in a drawer and walked 2 blocks to the river where the wind makes you pick a side against yourself. On the way back, I bought a tiny brass key tag, oval and unremarkable, and had it engraved with a word nobody but me needed sequence, because souvenirs should be from places you actually survived. At home early, I set the tag beside the spare apartment key on the marble near the sink and folded a short letter that wasn't a note. So much as an index, today's date, counseling appointment confirmed, next week's logistics if we choose distance. And a single sentence that refused to be dramatic, "We will be honest." Or we will be separate, and either way I will be specific. When Myra came in, she moved like someone learning a new gravity, heels in hand, posture careful to the point of kindness, and she read the letter once, then again, as if repetition might reveal a warmer synonym. "They want me to stay," she said without triumph. "Just air, to clean, to explain," and I nodded because contrition that uses nouns is work I respect. "I won't ask you to shield me," she added, and the smallness of the sentence made it large. I told her I wouldn't, told her also that explanations don't repair without restitution, and she surprised us both by saying, "Then I'll propose it," already opening a draft on her phone with the seriousness of a surgeon scrubbing in. We didn't hug the moment into a prettier shape. We stood with it until it agreed to stand on its own. Later, while the city tuned itself for evening, I moved the ring I still wore half a turn and set my father's watch on the counter to remember the shape of time when it's kept rightly. I packed a single overnight bag, not as an exit but as a fact, slid the key ring onto the brass oval that said sequence, and left it centered on the stone like a period that would not be argued with. The apartment held steady around us, neutral as a courtroom after the crowd goes home, and for the first time in months I felt no draft from lies chasing the door. The weather had finally matched the thermostat. Dawn came without ceremony, a thin ribbon of light ironing the creases out of the room. And for once the apartment didn't pretend to be anything but a box that held choices. Myra slept on her side with the careful stillness of someone who has decided not to dream anything she can't defend. And I stood at the counter where yesterday's brass oval lay, centered beside the spare key, the word sequence catching the first pale stripe of sun like a promise that had learned to speak in verbs. My letter remained folded where I'd left it, not a plea, an index, and next to it the counseling confirmation glowed on my phone time. Address, 2 names with space between them for air. I brewed coffee the way a judge might clear a throat, slow and audible, and thought about outcomes that aren't victories so much as properly labeled shelves. When Myra woke, she didn't perform a greeting. She reached for the letter first, then the key tag, then my face in that order, as if reassembling a map before asking for weather, and said simply, "Thank you for not shouting," which landed truer than apologies ever do because it honored the route, not just the destination. "We'll go to the appointment," she added. Not bargaining, not promising a plot twist, and followed it with the sentence I had not expected but recognized as Repair's first tool. I've drafted restitution, she said, and slid her phone across to reveal a memo that turned adjectives into arithmetic, reimbursements reversed, public notes amended, timelines corrected where they had envied fiction, and offered a step back from campaigns that required unambiguous trust. I read it like you read a weather report that names the wind you've been tasting for months. And for the first time since the gala, I felt relief unclench a muscle I'd convinced myself was bone. We didn't try to kiss a lesson into the morning. We edited a calendar, we picked clothes, we left the dishes to confess themselves later. Outside, the city lifted its shutters at a humane pace. A dog wanted everything, a kid tested a puddle, a bus sighed and forgave the curb. On the sidewalk, Myra threaded her fingers together like a witness remembering oath posture and said, "If you choose separate, I won't turn it into art." And I nodded because love without governance is theater and theater has taken enough from the budget. At the counseling office, we told the truth by turns, no exhibits, no defense rests. Just a slow unwind of rope we'd knotted with good intentions and applause. And I learned again that silence is not the absence of speech. It is the presence of order. Afterward, we walked nowhere in particular and discussed boring things that sounded like stability rent contingencies. Document safes, who keeps the blue chair that knows my back, and when we reached a corner where the light refused to rush, I placed the brass oval into her palm and kept the plain key. "Sequence is for the story," I said. "The key is for the door." And she closed her fingers around the tag like a person who has finally met a word she intends to deserve. By evening, emails had gone out that would outlive us board acknowledgments. Policy updates, the kind of public housekeeping that smells faintly of lemon and relief, and I returned the father's watch to my wrist because time had agreed to be counted again. We ate simply, we didn't narrate it, and when night reassembled the city, I left a small overnight bag by the door, not as a threat, but as a hinge, the way houses have doors because weather changes. Before sleep, Myra set her ring on the dresser, not inside a clutch, not as a trick. Just a circle learning how to be honest about its edges. We switched off the lamps without omens. She took his hand. I changed the ending? No note, only proof.